Alright, ninth grade math students, we're going to make a Tim and Tom model, a model of our Tim and Tom project. So what we want to do is we want to think about what are our stocks. Our stocks we have are Tim's savings and Tom's savings. So I'm going to add those two stocks. Go ahead and merge this here so we can see this a little better. So this will be Tim's savings this is Tom's savings. So those are our two stocks. Now what we're going to want to do is, I'm going to go ahead and use the thing as sector. This is just to make it look a little better. It really doesn't have any effect whatsoever on the running of the model. It just might make it look a little better. So what I'm going to do is use this thing up here called a sector. And I'm going to add to the sector Tim savings. I'm going to remove this sector up here, sorry about that. And then I'm going to add a sector for Tom. Put Tom in here. I can go ahead and lock these, but right now I want to add a couple more things. So make this look a little bit wider, because I do want to add a couple more items into this in just a few moments. So what we want to do is we want to flow into each of these. We want a flow for the deposit each month. Now of course we know that Tom does not start to deposit until after the first 10 years. Or Tim only deposits the first 10 years. Either way, they both are going to have a flow, whether that flow is going to be used or not. So this is going to be Tim's deposit, or depositing, if you want to think of that. If you want to think of it as the act of depositing, it's more verb-based, that's kind of what it is, but, and this will be Tom's deposit. And then also each month they're going to get an interest rate. Now the interest rate is the same, but we need a flow into each one of these. So there's probably another way we could do this, but this is the way I'm thinking of this. So this is Tim interest, or you could think of it as the interest being added, if you want to think of it as a verb-based. Now, so these flows right now are basically just acts of something coming in. These are, of course, unit flows going into each respective savings. So we need some value that's going to apply to that. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a converter, and this will be the monthly bonus or monthly amount. And then I also have a monthly amount for the interest rate. So we have to connect these things together. So the bonus, this monthly amount, is going to be flowing into each deposit. Now just be aware that this monthly amount may or may not be used. So we're going to have to set up some kind of formula for this. As well as the interest rate is going to be going into the flow for each interest rate, for each respective brother. And we can rename, I think we can rename this. This will be Tim, that's Tom. So we know that for each brother, they both start at 0. So we're going to start to set up our initial values. So Tim's savings, when we start out, it's going to start out at 0. Tom's savings starts out at 0. So the interest rate is going to be 7%. So we can say that's 0.07. Now the deposit is where it gets a little interesting, because the deposit, what we're saying is that Tim only gets a deposit. He only is going to deposit this monthly amount. Oh, we didn't set the monthly amount. So the monthly amount is going to be $2,000. So we're saying that Tim is only going to deposit this when the interval of time has been less than or equal to 10. So we're going to have to go back and set our run spec. So I'm going to go ahead and set that. Oops. If we go to model, we can do Control-Alt-R to set our run specs. And what we want to do is we want to make sure this is just one interval of time, and the time is going to be years, so this really doesn't matter. But we're going to set it to years because it's a yearly accrued interest amount. Now, how many times do we want to do this? Now, we think about this. They start doing this at age 22 and then stop at 67. They really don't start to deposit until 23. So really what we're trying to do is we got to figure out how many times we want to do this. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my Excel spreadsheet. You might remember doing this in Excel where they really started at age 23 and ended at 67. So how many intervals are we talking about? We're talking about 6 intervals. So even though the age itself is not going to look right, we could go to add that in here, but I'm not all that worried about that right now. But we could try to factor that in here. So we want Tim's deposit to only occur if I'm going to add an if statement, if the value of time, now we didn't set the value of time because that's established by Stella, if the value of time is less than or equal to 10. Because if that's true, then Tim is depositing. So if that's true, then we're just going to say, well, then we're going to use the monthly amount. We can go ahead and use not Monte Carlo, but monthly amount. Otherwise, Tim's not depositing anything because he's spending it on his Bahamas vacations. So that's Tim. And what about Tom? Well, in Tom's case, it's kind of the opposite. So for Tom, we're saying that if time, again, Stella's establishing time for us. If time is greater than 10, then that's when he starts to use the monthly amount. Otherwise, prior to that, he's spending it on vacations. So now the interest amount, that's actually kind of simple because really all interest is for each one of them is pretty much going to be the same. So for interest, it's going to be, did I not set? Yeah, I sure did. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to set up connectors from the savings back. So we need a connector, my boo-boo. We need a connector from the savings back to the interest for each one of these brothers, because they're going to accrue this interest. Sorry about that. So now, for interest, I can say that, like for Tim's interest, it's going to be whatever he had in savings times the interest rate. And the same thing for Tom. It's going to be whatever he had in savings times the interest rate. Right, so we have our run spec set up. If we go ahead and run this, we can see values. But to make this a little bit more visually appealing, what we can do is we could set up a table and add to that table Tim's savings and Tom's savings. And then we could also, if we wanted, we could add a graph and add to that graph Tim's savings and Tom's savings. Add a graph to that. Now we haven't formatted any of this, so let's see what happens when we run this. It should show us by the end of the span that Tom's savings should be more than, yeah, less than Tim. So Tim should be more than Tom, and it is. So if we look at the values here, we can see that by the end, now this is rounding out values. We should see by the end, I'm going to pull up the Excel spreadsheet here. We can see that by the end that Tim has around 295 and Tom's got around 276, and that's pretty much what we're seeing. So that's pretty close to what we would expect. Now we can add to this an interface to make this a little bit more interesting for someone who doesn't really know how this works. So I'm going to make a video here in just a moment explaining how an interface works.